While Gary works on that particular point right there of helping make sure everyone's taken care of, if you've noticed the two sides of the sermon outlines for this morning and for this evening, I'm trying to entice you to come back by giving you the short one this morning. And then there's a longer one this evening, but it looks longer, but don't be afraid of it. So please, come back this evening. It's not going to be as long as what it looks like. To that fact, this morning, the sermon is How to Love. And we all know what this word is. We all express it in different ways, and that's something that we're going to kind of look at in this lesson a little bit. And the idea of just being able to love. You know, when we think about love itself, how easy is it for us to love someone we love? Now, it sounds kind of, I always hate a definition that puts the word inside of it. How do you love what you love? Well, I love what I love. You know, there are certain foods I love to eat. There are certain foods I do not like. There are certain people that I love in different ways. Unfortunately, there are some people that we'll say I need to work on. Because I don't want to say that I hate them. I don't want to say that I don't love them. But let's say we love them differently. And we'll look at that as we go through the lesson a little bit. But to that idea, how do we love our spouse? How do we love our parents? How do we love for those that are parents? How do you love your children? How do we love other family members? How do we love our best friend, our neighbor? How do we love each other in this room? Each one of those categories is a little bit different. We express that a little different. And that is, I think, natural. We cannot love everybody the exact same way. But I think the point is, do we love them? How about someone we've never met or someone we know absolutely nothing about? You know, I think as a congregation we take and show that love in many ways. We've had the Ukrainian relief efforts come through. We've had people knock on the doors. We've had people in need come by. We send out money to some of these mission groups and missionaries that go overseas and deal with people that we know nothing about. So I think it's possible we can love them. It's just how do we do it? What about someone who does not love you? I'm not asking if you love them back or not, but how do we do that? How do we think about that idea of someone, because there are people out there that do not love us. They don't love us as Christians for telling the truth and raining on their parade of all the things that they like to do because it's fun to them, but the Bible says don't do it. There are also just some evil people out there that just do bad things and don't care about anybody but themselves. How do we love that person? I think each of these are valid points, so if you haven't, if you're not aware of this, and you need to be, Valentine's Day is coming up this week. But this is not a very specific one to Valentine's. I'm actually opening the scope a little bit further about how to love. Not so much of like in the world sees it as Valentine's Day of get yourself a sweetheart and love them. If you already have one, don't get another one. But, if you have your sweetheart, how do we love our sweethearts? How do we show love to others? I think it's a more broad sense. As going through grade school and such, we always brought Valentine's cards for all the other kids. How do we express our gratitude, our love to each other? So as such, we see some of these ideas throughout this lesson. We first off have to think about who is it that we are to love. So in this idea of who to love, the first on our list should be God. We see this through many scriptures, and I've brought down in some of this section here several scriptures from the Old Testament, and then we'll also focus on the New Testament. But we see this idea of love. I'm going to go ahead and go to Exodus chapter 20 and take a look at this first idea here. So Exodus, of course, they're coming out of Egyptian bondage. And in Exodus 20 is the start of the Ten Commandments. As we look at it, why I don't have all 10 of them highlighted in this section here is because a couple of them come a little in the next point. But Exodus 20 verses 1 through 11 is God's commandments to us about focusing on Him. He tells us that I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make to yourself images of any likeness that is in heaven above, or of the earth beneath, or of the winds of the earth. You shall not bow down before them or serve them, for I am the Lord your God. I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the father upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. He's trying to tell us, he's trying to tell the Israelites at that time, and us through the learning of the Old Testament, He loves us. He wants us to love Him. As part of that love, it is showing respect as we look at these first commandments here, that He has done so much for us. He wants us just to serve Him and not chase our own imaginations. As we look through all of these, I'm going to try and keep my finger put right there because we'll come back to that in just a second. In Matthew chapter 22, we see verses 37 and 38. Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." The first and greatest commandment. The first commandments of the 10 commandments are those focused towards God. The next ones focus on our neighbor. So as we keep our finger in these two spots, and we're kind of flipping back and forth just for a moment, the question becomes, who is our neighbor? If we're to love our neighbor, then who is that? As we look at Matthew, as he continues to the next verse right there, he says, "And the second is like it, that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the laws and the prophets." The remainder of the 10 commandments, as we look through them, are all about commandments of how we treat each other. It is to look at each other of how we're to do this, about, not honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder, shall not commit adultery, steal, bear false witness, covet your neighbor. How do we interact with each other? So when Christ says, our neighbor, our initial response is, those of like faith. To the Israelites, it was those of within their own nation, within their own areas. For us, perhaps it's just within the household of God, within those of like faith. But it also doesn't stop there. That is a good starting point, a good way to start getting ready for these things. But we also have to remember the stranger or the visitors, those that are outside. In Leviticus, it talks about, though he gives the commandment there and about treat the visitors within your city as if they are your own people. Show no partiality. Who is our neighbor? It's anyone who's not me. Shall we go for the most basic definition? Anyone that is not me is my neighbor. That includes our strangers, our visitors. So what about this idea of who to love? I can love most of these people very easily. But what about the person that I consider my enemy? What about the person that takes and gives evil towards me and does me wrong? Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. Christ teaches us about love. Starting in verse 33, he hits us with one of his sayings here on his Sermon on the Mount. After he gets to a certain point, he starts hitting several key areas about what we believe, or what they believed then, what we should believe, how we should apply it. So when he looks at it, he says, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your father and hate your enemy." That sounds easy enough to do, right? If they don't like me, I don't like them. Continuing to verse 44, but I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you. Our love changes depending on who we're talking about, doesn't it? I love my spouse in a certain way, even though she's not physically present today because she ran off with someone else's spouse that's in this room. My mother-in-law and my wife decided to have a ladies' weekend. They went and had a mother-daughter time, and I support her. As part of my love, I let her go. I didn't lock her in the house. It works out better that way. But I encourage the time that, because she has a love for her mother. So cherish it. Encourage it. They have that bond. I have the bond with my wife. We each have it in different ways. And now to the person that does not like me, uses me, abuses me, Christ tells us how we can love that person. Maybe it's not going up and giving them a hug every time we see them. It's definitely not going to be giving them the peck on the cheek or a kiss on the lips like I would give my wife. Or a good handshake like we do to each other as we greet one another. But so how is this that we love our enemy? Bless those who curse you. They spit cursings out on us. We give kindness back to them. Do good to those who hate you. They take and do us wrong. They make our life miserable. And yet we still do something good, either in front of them or in the background, something to help them out. This one possibly, some of the easiest I think of on application of this is think about at your job. Is there that one employee that just makes everyone else's job harder? Do we still do something to help them out if they need it? Or to help them? They ask for something and do we just drag our feet about it? Or do we actually give it and produce it like we should? But also, and probably one of the strongest points of this, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Even if they do us wrong, they do me wrong constantly, they do you wrong, how do we address that issue? Pray for them. All of this is to help us build ourselves up and to build up the ability to actually give love. We have to be the one that we can look at in the mirror. We are the ones that will stand in the judgment and have to decide and say, how did we love our enemy? Because Christ has told us to do so. How will we do that? If I hate my enemy, I will never reach out to them. I will never help them. I will never take and have an opportunity to show them the light that could be within me. I will not show them the works of God using hate. But if I pray for them, maybe I'll be open to seeing something that comes. So why are we to love? We know who all to love, and basically we just hit a list that says love everybody. So why do we love? Why is this such an important thing? I think we found out one reason is that, out of hating our enemy or anything like that, if we were this morning's Bible study with Cain and Abel, if love would have been in the picture, murder would not have happened. But if we look at 1 Corinthians 13, it talks about love so extensively, and out of it says, out of faith, hope, and love, the greatest is love. I think that's quite interesting and unique that throughout the whole theme of the Bible is have faith in God, but yet when it comes down to the point that Paul makes here, he says the greatest is love. Through love, we can open ourselves up to the faith. Through love, we can open ourselves up and see the hope that is before us. God gives us faith in Him because He loved us. We see that time and time again. Also a reflection of this morning's Bible study. What did God do every time man sinned? When Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, when Cain and Abel's that sin came forward. He asked the questions of the mankind that is there, what has happened? And basically, kind of what we discussed, what are you going to do about it? Will you come back to me, focus back on God, or will we take and be, as we said this morning, stew in our own anger and our own frustrations and our own sins? Through love, we can have all the others. God himself is love. If we are to be like him, we must love as he does. Does he not love us so much that he gave his only Son? Does he not love us so much that even though we continue to sin, he is there waiting for us to come back? Think of the prodigal son. Think about all the different examples that he gives about his willingness and desire for us to come back. How many letters are written to erring Christians, to erring congregations, saying, please come back. Christ says if we love him, then we will obey his commandments. In John chapter 14, verse 23 and 24, the previous verses, he's talking to the apostles directly, but he also gets into the point of it here as well. In John chapter 14, he tells them, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and he will come with him and make our home with him. He who does not love me will not keep my words, and the words which you hear are not mine, but the Father's who sent me. Do we want to abide with God the Father? Do we want to have that connection with God the Father through Christ? If anyone loves me, loves Christ, then he will keep my word. We will do as he says to do. We will study those scriptures. We will look at the lessons he gives us. We will grow in faith, hope, and love. We will continue to grow closer to God, and in doing so, the Father will do what? Love us. Think back as children, how was the family life? Was it better when when our parents were showing love towards us, or showing discipline towards us because we did something wrong? I seem to remember smoother times when there was no belt or discipline involved. I like the love, the cherishment, receiving of gifts, receiving of compliments, you bring home that report card that you're not ashamed to hand to your parents and don't try and hide from them. Receiving that love, feeling the love, and will come and make his home with him. The love of the Father is so great that he is willing to bring us into heaven through his grace if we will do this simple task. Now, it can be rough at times. It can be difficult to accomplish and complete. So to that idea, how do we show our love? We know what we're to do. We know who we're to do it to, but how do we do it? I'm not going to leave you hanging. We have to consider the things that are spoken in the Word. As again, we look back at Matthew, we look at chapter 7 and verse 12. We looked at this section of Scripture the other week about looking at some judgment ideas, and this is right in the middle of it, but also a very practical thing to look at. Matthew 7:12 says, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. The laws are not there to make it something hard for us to be able to do. It's something to help guide and focus us towards righteousness. It's something to help guide us towards doing right to one another so that we can understand God's purpose for us, how God intends us to live and to go. So this golden rule, quite simply, the easiest way to show our love is treat others the way you want to be treated. and do it all the time. Even the person that doesn't do it back to you, just because they're showing you something evil doesn't mean that you give it back to them. It's got to come from within. We have to take from our heart and show others the way we would like to be treated. We show others that way because if we are following Christ himself, what did Christ want? He shared love with everyone that he met. A few times he got tough love shared with them, especially when he started calling out scribes and Pharisees and those who were doing evil. But most of the time, even to the sinners that he would go to daily, he offered them a chance to come back. He offered them a pathway to come back to find that love in their life that is missing. They are filled with torments and issues, and he is giving them a way to find that love. Which would you rather have in your life? You know that you're doing something wrong, and someone comes up and starts waving their finger in your face and telling you what's wrong with you, or someone with an open hand saying, "Come, let me help you." Christ showed that love in his actions each day. Love towards each person may be different. Again, with our spouse, with our brethren, with strangers, with those who persecute us. But in all situations, as we looked at in Matthew 5, verse 44, we can pray for them. Pray for all of them. We are even shown in other places, pray for the leadership. That's an interesting one sometimes. We're not always the best at picking as a nation, of picking our leaders. Sometimes we have okay ones, sometimes good ones, sometimes not so good ones. But we can still pray for them. We can pray for our neighbor. We can pray for our enemy. We can pray always. Pray without ceasing. Why do we do that? Why do we think about prayer? Through prayer, if we put this person into our minds in a positive thought, what does our heart then start to follow suit with? If we always think about this other person in the negative light, then what is our focus going to be every time we see them? It's not going to be on love. However, if we start to encourage our mind to think about them in a positive way, maybe we can come up with the right words to say at some point. It may not be full verses, it may not be a Bible study, but maybe there are little points that we can start putting in their path. Maybe we can recognize a time to say something that is correct. We won't take and snap at them when they snap at us. Maybe we won't ever reach that person, but maybe we'll reach the neighbor. How many times do we see something, and this part of what's going to be tonight as well, is if I see a situation going on over there, do I see it? I'm witness to it. I can see the interactions that you have with that other person day by day or instance by instance. They are always being mean and ugly, and you're just being nice. Do others see that? Now, of course, you got the kids on the playground. Someone hits me, I turn around and hit them back. Who gets in trouble? Me. The teacher heard the first sound and started turning around to see me retaliate. Is that what the world sees? If that is the first glimpse of Christianity to some people, is me retaliating against someone else in a negative way, and yet I have a platform built on love, how likely are they to believe anything I say? How likely are they to come into this door and to sit down among us? How likely am I going to be able to show them love without them questioning what's next? As we look at it, we can pray, and through that prayer needs to start being earnest. It's not pray for them to do this right. Perhaps we pray that their hearts may be open. Perhaps we pray that we have an opportunity to share something positive with them. Perhaps our prayer needs to be that I have more patience to be able to endure the negativity and stay positive myself. In doing this and putting this into our prayers, into our thoughts, let that become something that comes from the heart, that we might love. We may not love the actions, but we need to love the soul. The soul came from God. If we love God, we need to love each other. We can pray that the actions match how precious the soul is. We can welcome all into the assembly or any place in life equally. In James chapter 2, it gives that reference that we used a couple weeks ago in looking at two people come into the back door, one finely dressed and another one not so well. We have one rich and one poor, and what do we do with those two people? You can study back into those verses to see what they did and what they were admonished to do, but the point of that illustration, treat all people equally. Don't treat one greater than the other because of attire or status or anything else. We are to welcome all. Now, in that particular incident, it talks about people coming into the assembly, but here's the question. What's the assembly? It could be the assembly right here inside this building at this very time. It could be the assembly of our home. It could be the assembly of us out at a gathering or something else. Open that up and look at how, if we're not to do it in here, then are we to do it out there? Who do we respect? Who do we show that respect to? The point that James was trying to make there is show it to all. Do not take and show partiality of persons one over another. Yes, we have our closer ring of friends. We have those of like faith. We have our own family. But we're also expand outward. Love all. For we're all God's creation. And then in Matthew chapter 25, a great example to wrap all this, to kind of start wrapping this idea up and to really hit home, how do we show love? You know, a lot of things come in that we don't even think about. There are so many opportunities that we have each and every day to show love. Do we even consider that to be, well, let me do this because it shows love? Or do we just do it? That's something we see here. Matthew chapter 25, we see the little things, the simple things, the things we may just do by instinct, by nature. Do we give ourselves enough credit? And I say it that way not to try and, have us start boasting or feeling good about ourselves, but think about it. When we get discouraged about our service to God, about our abilities, well, I can't do that. Think of some of the different ways and how complicated these things right here in this list are. And tell me, is it really that hard to love? Most of the time it is these small things. Matthew 25, verse 31 beginning, is the judgment scene. Jesus is portraying the judgment. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then he will sit on his throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he will set up the sheep on his right hand and the goats on the left, and the king will come to those on his right hand. Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared from the foundation of the world. Why are they getting this treatment? Why are they about to inherit the kingdom of the world? Look at the things that they did in love in their life. For I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. That is the credit that they are being given of what they did in their lives, how they showed love to one another, to each other, to other people. It doesn't say it right here that they did it in love, but if they are doing these things in the name of God, what are they doing? If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And the people said, the righteous answered him and said, when did we see you hungry and feed, thirsty and give you drink, see a stranger and take you in, clothed you and naked and clothed you? or you were sick or in prison and we came to you. They were thinking, when did we do this directly to you, Son of Man? We have not done that. None of us today can physically serve the Son of Man as Nicodemus or as Mary and Martha or as any of the others that he went to their physical house and sat down in. We can't do this to him. But he says, assuredly I say, inasmuch as you did it to the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. By showing love to one another in the various ways that we can, even in these small things right here. If we have an extra stack of pancakes on the table and someone's hungry for breakfast, or supper if y'all do pancakes for supper sometimes, like we do, do we share what we have? Do we help those who are in need when that need arises? When we have the opportunity. We may not always have the opportunity at every situation for every single person, but when we do we take advantage of that? Do we offer that kindness? And yes, we can use the word love. Do we offer that love to a person in need? To do these things, not seeking the rewards, not seeking praises or accolades or our picture in the front page of the paper saying, I brought a can of beans to somebody. Are we doing this out of love? Are we doing this that maybe the rest of us don't even know that you did? So many appreciate, especially what the ladies do in this congregation. Especially when y'all start gather together and start getting cards up and sending them out to people, and all of you sign. You pass it around the table and everyone signs it. You're not signing your name just because it's a piece of paper handed in front of you. We see the love that comes from that. We see the love of standing around after services, before services, and all of the fellowship that happens. We see it when we see each other out and about, and we say hi to each other. Because we're not ashamed to be seen with each other. To do all these things out of love. It doesn't have to be something grand and miraculous. It just has to be something from the heart. When Christ gives the Great Commission about going into all the world, teaching to obey all things which he has commanded, how do we complete this without loving those around us? If we don't love others around us, then we will not teach them. If we don't teach them, we are not following Christ's command. And we put ourselves in danger. If we hate others, then we will never reach out to them with the living word. And in doing so, if we do not offer them life, we have allowed them to die. Are we willing to have that on our conscience going before the judgment? Christ says to love one another. Christ says to reach out, to pray for them at the very least. If we never get a chance to do anything else, have we prayed for them? Have we tried to smile going down the hallway as they pass by with a scowl face? Do we say at least hello? To love everybody is a big task and will take patience and self-evaluation along the way. And I realize I just did an entire lesson on love without quoting, I think I did one verse out of the chapter of love that is so commonly described. Leave that as a backup, as a follow-up study for each of you. To see some of the ways of love, to be able to look at that, 1 Corinthians chapter 13 gives so much great insight to that. But there are several other verses that I wanted to kind of highlight and look at in some of these ideas. And that was the idea of this one here. And I also hope and pray that we'll be able to gather again together tonight, because I have a few other ideas of how to illustrate the lesson instead of going straight to the main text that everyone goes to. Tonight we're going to look at about, faith, a steadfast faith. Out of a few people that, and it's going to be examples of, we're going to look at a few things about their lives that characterize it. To that point of how do we love? How do we conduct ourselves daily in this life? How do we go when we walk out that door? How does the world see us? It's another thought about those for on this evening's lesson is why did they have such a steadfast love? And what influence does it give? It's amazing to see the influence that having that steadfast faith has to other people. The same can be said about how to love. If we love everybody, if we try and extend that helping hand, that friendly gesture, people notice. They take notice. Do we have struggles in our life today? If we do have a struggle that needs to be addressed, please know that this invitation is one of love. It is one not to look to see who stands up to come forward. We're all about to stand, so that awkwardness is out of the picture. But if you have the need to come forward for the invitation, for the prayers of the congregation, we encourage you to do so because we do it out of love, out of respect for each other. We desire to help one another in this process. If we can be of assistance to you, let us know while together we stand and sing.